Welcome to Not What I Thought. I'm Erika.
I'm Yolanda.
And I'm Becca. We're therapists, entrepreneurs, and perfectly imperfect humans.
We first met during a business owner retreat where we became fast friends because we're not afraid to be real and ask the hard questions about life. What we thought it would be like, how messy it actually is, and the courage it takes to create the life we want.
We continue to build our friendship and personal growth through our own retreats. We find the deepest connection in sharing our struggles and finding what we have in common rather than what divides us.
We're breaking down hard topics on our podcast and together have conversations about what it takes to find real talk, real support, and real rest for professional women. We're glad you're here. Join us on your favorite podcast platform.
Wrapping up the year and looking towards the next year. It's funny because in our home it feels like earlier and earlier every year we're like putting up holiday decorations. I'm like, can we at least get to Halloween before we put a tree up? And I think I definitely have noticed like this like earlier and earlier looking towards the next year and like what that is going to look like and mapping things out and all of that goal setting for the new year that happens as we shift into the last quarter. And so the three of us have been having conversations about that in preparation for our free workshop that is happening in January of 2025. And what I would like to talk about today is how my like more formal quote unquote goal setting. We've talked about how we don't love that word all the time. That can be a weighted word. But how my goal setting or intention setting has really shifted to like a much more macro level of using a word of the year.
Explain
And so, what's that?
I said, explain what you mean.
Yeah. So we're all familiar with like, what's your word for that? That's part of the conversation when it gets to the end of the year, the beginning of the next year, right? People are like, what's your word of the year? And for a long time, I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't know. What's the purpose of a word of the year? I don't know what this means. I know goal setting. I know like X, Y, like, um, but not word of the year. And so I think it was 2019. And I had like part of my goal for 2018 was this bullet journaling. I got my first bullet journal and like, I'm going to be so productive and like fill in the dots and all that kind of stuff. And the bullet journaling kind of took on a life of its own. And I found myself at the end of 2018 reflecting on the year, kind of going through my journals in preparation for the next year. Like, what are my intentions? What are my goals? What do I want to do? And in reflecting over 2018, I just reading through my journals and finding how, as I read through, how constricted I felt in my body just with like all of the things that I had on my to-do list and all of the places I was going and all of the trainings I was doing and like all of that stuff. And um and I thought, you know what? I think for me, like this word of the year thing is going to be what is my hope for 2019? So that for 2019 was spacious. I thought I want the opposite of this constricted feeling. And so I am going to use spaciousness as a touchstone for 2019. And like any solid goals or agendas that I would set would be kind of a reflection of that word. So I noticed how that kind of took place over 2019. And ironically enough, in that spaciousness, um, other things started to kind of shake loose. And so for 2020, ironically enough, my word of the year was trust. And boy, was that a touchstone with COVID and everything that happened there. So, I just over the years, I part of my intention setting, part of my goal setting is less because I can get really rigid and perfectionist with the big goals. And I can get really hard on myself if, here are my first quarter goals. And we talked about how unrealistic sometimes we can make those things, not based on the reality of what life is or what your business is and all that kind of stuff. Um, and all of that I notice can really pull me into the weeds and spin my over functioning and my perfectionism into overdrive. And I noticed that having this word of the year is more so this kind of gentle but powerful way of reminding myself of my intention for the year. And so I even include kind of prompts in because I do journal daily. I've gotten into that practice just because it feels so good and filling for me. And using that in combination with my word of the year and the special prompts that I use, um, it actually has allowed me over time to trust myself more and intuitively moving to meet goals and intentions. Um, and it's also become like a greater type of spiritual practice for me. Does any of that make sense?
It does.
It's just an aside, but when you say everybody asks what's your word of the year, you might be the only person I know who does word of the year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. It's
No, I think we
definitely
should
something
leave
I
this
associate
in.
with you. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I usually do one, but I don't feel I integrate it like as well as you do.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
Kind of neither here nor there, just like, oh, it's interesting.
No, no, no. Yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to kind of jog my memory and like, who are the people that I've seen talking about a word of the year? Like, where did I even get that from to begin with?
Can you say more about how having this practice of the word of the year has helped you learn to trust yourself more or like move away from the rigidity?
Hmm. I think over time, I have realized that whatever the whatever the goal is, I know what steps I need to take, right? If I want to um, eat healthy or move my body or like whatever the thing is, I know how to do that. I don't need, a list of like a smart goal and breaking it down and like all of that. Even with bigger business things that are finances or what have you, I know it needs to be done. And I think part of it was being so frustrated with life happening and some of these goals or like movement toward goals being out of my control, which is part of what we've talked about in one of our other episodes, right? And so realizing how deflating that could be for me when it happened, having the overarching idea of the word of the year and knowing internally that I know how to move myself in that direction has allowed me to kind of I've noticed that I have this process where I kind of go meta about something and then I'll kind of go into more detail and then I'll go back meta and then I'll go into more detail. And so that having the word of the year allows me to kind of operate from a more flexible overview so that
Mhm.
I'm less likely to get pulled into the weeds. And trusting myself that I know in the ebbs and flows of my day-to-day life that it will unfold. Like I can check in with myself energetically and trust that when I do that, that I'll still be moving forward and making progress.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I also put my word of the year like in the middle of my vision board, and I keep my vision board like right above my journaling desk. So
Mhm.
it's like right visually right there in front of me every day.
Yeah. I like that part about there being more flexibility
Mhm.
in maybe how you make decisions or in what, to use different terminology, like what accomplishing the goal means, right?
Yeah.
It's like less rigid about that and more of like, oh, well, if this is
Mhm.
my intention or my hope that I would have a life that is more spacious, that
Mhm.
could look a whole bunch of different ways and all of them are
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't play out the one way that I had initially imagined, it doesn't mean that it's worthless
Right.
or failure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the year that I wrote my book, my word of the year was create. And so I didn't sit down thinking I'm going to write X number of words per day.
It was this year I create.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm almost thinking about it from an essentialism lens. So if you know your word of the year and then you're
Mhm.
considering what to do each day or each decision you're
Mhm.
going to make, it's a easy way to evaluate, should I say yes or to this or no to this?
Mhm.
Um, that's how it's landing in my brain anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the process for me. How does this fit in to this greater thing?
So I'm making a connection, which might initially not make sense, but I think it's gonna.
Okay. Throw it out there. Let's hear it.
Um, so I was listening to something recently where people were talking about the idea of manifesting our
Mhm.
goals, really believing in a
Mhm.
vision.
Mhm.
And the examples that the person was giving were about finances.
Mhm.
Um, and like, I want to be a person who doesn't have to worry about money, XYZ, whatever. And I thought maybe just because that's how my brain works, I don't know, but I had a thought of like, ooh, this could be dangerous.
Mm. Is that Becca frozen? Uh-oh. You were frozen. We didn't hear you.
We
It
heard
could
this
be
could
dangerous.
This could be dangerous, right?
Okay.
um, this could be dangerous because it's a way that people could get into a lot of debt if they take that
Mm.
concept and interpret it as,
Mhm.
um, well, I'm just going to start living my life as if I have lots of money. I'm manifesting it and like it will come,
Mhm.
right?
And it'll happen. Mhm.
um, and as I was listening to these people talk, I thought, oh, I think a maybe more helpful way to consider that is not that I already have the money, but if I was a person who had lots of money, how would I be? And I can start
Mhm. Yeah.
being that person, right? So someone who has
Mhm.
lots of financial ease probably is really careful with their money. They
Mhm.
and is it's worth sitting down and thinking about, well, how will I be when I am that person? Do I
Mhm.
pay close attention to what I spend? Do I have lots of investments? Do I, what
Mhm.
is going on that I get to live that life? And then
Mhm.
I can start being that now. So
Yeah.
instead of spending the money to try to get the thing to happen, I can
Right.
look at like, well, how do I now, with the
Yeah.
place that I'm in now, be a person who watches their money carefully or who makes wise investments or who doesn't spend frivolously or whatever the thing is that's going to get me to the place. Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's something about the connection that I made to what you were talking about, Yolanda, is something about this, like, uh, if I want to create or if I want to be spacious or if I want whatever, it's like, I can't just
Mhm.
say that and then sit here and do nothing.
Right.
I need to
Yeah.
start being a person who makes decisions that
Right.
allow spaciousness in my life, or I need
Yeah.
to
be a person who makes time for creativity if that's a thing that I
Mhm.
have decided I value or that I want to call into my life, right? So there's a way
Yeah.
that having this word or this intention, if it's
Mhm.
connected to meaningful or if it's connected to like the way that you're making decisions,
Mhm.
move that out of something that is just like this hopeful fantasy
Right.
life and into something that actually is like makes a shift in how you live and how
Yeah.
much you enjoy your life.
That's exactly my process. Yeah. The year of spaciousness was exactly that. Does this feel constricting, or does this open and give me space and time and energy? And like, do I feel like I can breathe deeply?
And it didn't just happen because you wanted it. It happened because you made the choices along the way that were in alignment with that value
Right.
for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your word of the year this year?
This year, I know this has been a weird year. My word for this year, and it's so funny because my vision board actually randomly fell. Um, it fell. It
Your
usually
vision
is
board was like,
right. It
yes.
did. It usually is like hanging right here. I had this little shelf on the vision board, and it fell. My word for this year is catalyst. And sometimes a word like comes to me, and I don't really know what it means. You know, I'm like, oh, okay, catalyst. We'll see what that is. And for catalyst, it's been a little bit less clear for me.
Mhm.
And also, I'm like, well, part of the catalyst can be something that is happening under the surface that I don't necessarily
Don't
see
see.
right now.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of like trusting that will unfold, and that might unfold in areas of my life that I wouldn't normally quote unquote goal set around,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? Because like I said, some of these are like deeper for me. Like the whole year of trust was like a spiritual practice on steroids. And I think that something similar is happening with Catalyst, that I can't quite pinpoint it, but something is happening for me internally and spiritually
Mhm.
that um, I'm trying to practice having patience with myself in the process and trusting the process to see how it will continue to unfold.
That would be super hard for me.
It that's why it's such a spiritual, that's why it's such a freaking yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't wait to see
Um,
what you say a couple of years from now
right.
about what Catalyst was all about.
Yeah, I'm curious about it. Now I'm able to, because I've been doing it for a few years, I'm able to hold it with some curiosity to say, I don't know, there's something, And my word for last year was legacy. So I think somehow they tie together. I'm not quite sure. And surprisingly, as an Enneagram 6, like needs safety and security kind of person, I'm okay with that. I mean, I have my moments of struggle for sure, but for the most part, I'm okay with it. And um, yeah, I don't know. It sounds really woo woo as we're talking about it, but it feels so firm for me in my practice of it.
Even just that recognition of, I know that this maybe sounds different to other people, but it feels so solid to me, and that's what matters.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And, to um, kind of bringing in Erica's practice of experimenting and stuff, I would have never, unless I had gotten curious and said, I don't, let's just see what this might be. This whole word of the year thing. I don't know what it means, but let's see what I make of it.
I love that, obviously, but
And so even in preparing for this conversation, a little, that it kind of does around this time of year, and I'm like, okay, we've still got time with catalysts. We, don't spend too much time and energy about what is next yet, but it's there. And I don't know, I have this whole process of sitting with whatever word starts to bubble up and kind of holding it loosely and seeing how it feels, and like doing that over a period of time. And even with my vision board, it takes me several days to make my vision board, because I build a relationship with it. It sounds so bizarre, but it's kind of my process. I do that with my journals too. As I'm starting a new journal, before I finish one and move to the next one, I'll just lay the journal out on my desk and like look at it and admire it, and touch it. And I indulge in some really beautiful journals, and so that's part of my process too. So as weird as it sounds, this practice lets me have a sense of what needs to be done without getting bogged down by a calendar that has like every minute scheduled. Those planners that are like, it has the day and it's like everything is like blocked out. Um, just the thought of that feels like my chest starts tightening. And so I love having my word of the year and my bigger kind of focus on my concept of love legacy and leaving a love legacy, and just kind of checking in with myself at the beginning of the day to say, what does that mean for today?
What does your heart know to be true, Yolanda?
Through this long time experiment that I keep renewing every year, my heart knows that I can both have focus on getting things done and being productive, and also allow things to unfold in ways that I would never have imagined. And I'm really thankful for it.
What does your heart know, Erika?
I'm actually processing something I think outside of word of the year, but I like what you were saying here at the end of like you're kind of hearing it out loud and you're like, okay, this sounds a little woo-woo and I don't know what's gonna land or not, or if people get it, but like you get it. And I don't know. I'm thinking through the like being aesthetically drawn to a journal, or um, the pictures on your board. See, there you go.
It is beautiful.
It is. And I think and how I try to bring things into my life through like a minimalism lens, I have learned to trust that there are some things that I don't need to cognitively understand or have a rationalization for. If I'm drawn to it, I can still bring it in and figure it out later. So my heart
Yeah.
knows that Yolanda is brilliant.
Oh, thank you. How about you, Becca? What does your heart know?
My heart knows that this process of figuring out what we want for our lives and like which direction we want to take is so deeply personal.
Mm.
I think it's important that we have a direction, because if we're not in the driver's seat of our own life, then someone else or some other force is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just as I'm listening to how we all approach this thing so differently, and how they all have each of our three approaches has, I think, value in it. Uh, it's so personal to us, and I couldn't do it the way that Yolanda does. And that doesn't mean she needs to be like me or I need to be like her. Like, we can each find our own way, and there is so much beauty in that.
I love that. And if I can just add one more, if you had told me back in my like the big chart and like your year goals and broken down by quarter and broken down by month, and like that, those days, that there would be less of that and more of this, I would have been like, "You've lost your mind. That's not the way that I operate. I need that structure." Um, and so it's kind of surprising to me too.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to surprise ourselves.
We are so excited to announce our upcoming live event. Join us online on January 19th, 2025, where we'll guide you through the sometimes shame and guilt-ridden experience of setting goals for the year. We'll have real talk about how goal setting can lead to burnout and real support for visioning a 2025 that includes real rest, connection, and play. Go to notwhatithought.com to register. We hope to see you there.